and the final being so heavily weighted, I ended up missing by less than 1%, which was interesting. That was the first time I had ever like actually failed anything ever. The next semester had to repeat my first semester. Obviously, all my friends were still there, so we all still hung out, and I was just with another class in my day to day classes. But I got to take that semester to kind of, because I had already learned most of the content a semester before, I got to kind of figure out what is my learning style, what stuck and what really did not stick. For me, just like writing things down or highlighting things in a book doesn't work. I have to put real world applications on top of that. I have to draw something out. I'm a very visual person. And so, I mean, I even in my life today, I'm thinking about it, but until I like draw it out on a whiteboard and there's like a flow diagram and I've got it all kind of figured out, it doesn't actually stick in my brain. So that was interesting. I then That was also the semester that I started dating the boyfriend long distance who, after I broke up with him, was why I started this YouTube channel in general. Um, so I kind of tried to bring a little bit more of like a human approach to med school because I was, trying to be in a relationship, trying to do things better, learn better. That's also when I adopted Scrap, who's nicely sleeping away down there. Um, and so it kind of got me out of that like neurotic, overly caffeinated, just like sit and stare at the library for 30 hours and it's going to work. It didn't work, but ended up obviously passing, continued on through all the semesters doing well. And then my last semester, all like my friend group all left. And obviously because they had finished. And that's when me and that boyfriend had broken up. So that's when I picked up YouTube and started doing all this stuff. And so we finished that. They had us do a like mini semester in Miami, which is where, if there was a headquarters for the school, that was kind of where it was, where we did some like kind of hyper focused clinical training before we actually went to the hospitals. Took my first step exam, passed that, and then went on to starting that third year set of rotations. The way that the school I went to works is that they pay a handful of hospitals around the US to take students, train them, put them through rotations. There are some that are harder to get into, and so they rank it based on like your GPA and your scores and all that sort of stuff. And I had really wanted this one that was out in California. It was in Bakersfield. So, any of you who are aware, it is considered the armpit of California, but you're easily within driving distance of LA, Santa Barbara, Palm Springs. And so I wanted to be out there. Ended up getting a call again, hey, somebody dropped out. Can you be out here in a week or something stupid? So I had to go buy a car. I had to go again find an apartment. And me, my dad, and Scrap drove out. yeah, like I think 5 days after I found out that I got into the rotation and moved into an apartment, bought furniture, all that sort of stuff. And at that point, just kind of dove in headfirst. Obviously, again, still really wanting to do surgery and completed my rotations. I was that kid who broke the rules. Um, you were not supposed to stay on for more than a 12-hour shift. But when I was in my rotation for trauma surgery, I just loved it. I could not get enough. I wanted to be able to follow the patient from, getting the call from the ER, bringing them up to the operating room, getting them to the ICU, running to the blood bank, and really just that like high pressure stuff I loved. And I wanted to see the patient all the way through, at least through the day. The longest I ever went was 36 hours, but don't tell anybody. And the chief resident changes every 12 hours. So all you had to do was kind of like disappear for a little bit, come back. Hey, I'm here. I'm on your shift tonight. Um, and there was one moment where I was in the ER checking on somebody. Something happened in front of me, and I had to manage that, help get them up to the OR. I scrubbed in, I helped with the surgery, and they had to go, back and forth to the OR multiple times throughout the night. And it was a complex case that ended up, we ended up saving them. But that was the first time I had ever been so locked in that nothing else registered. I wasn't scared. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't questioning, like, you're just a third year medical student. You don't know what you're doing. My brain just said, oh, that just happened. I'm going to go do what I'm supposed to do. The only thing I can really compare it to was when I was on Ritalin, and it felt like the blinders went up and I was just focused on one thing, but this wasn't in a neurotic way. This was just like my brain is locked in on what we're doing, and I'm fully mentally aware and capable at this point in time to operate at, my highest frequency. And that was such an aha moment for me, where I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I love this. You never know your schedule for the day. You have to react immediately. You you know the you win by doing everything you can. And also, any of you who happen to know any trauma surgeons, they tend to be a little rough, if we're being like really, really honest. Assholes in a way. And I kind of found my community with them. I like to be blunt. I like to say the thing. I like to use colorful language. I just loved trauma. I was like, this is it. These are my people. This is the length of time that I want to be involved in a patient's life cycle of care. Like, there are incredibly patient people who are ICU physicians and internal medicine and PT and all these people that help that person get as close to back to normal as possible. And their dispositions are phenomenal. Their education, their knowledge, the things that they need to do is amazing. It just wasn't for me. So I finished my third year in Bakersfield, rotated in all the different specialties that you're supposed to, did the thing, spent as little time as I could doing the ones that I didn't want to do. Um, took my second board exam, which at that point in time, it was two. There was one that was a test, like an actual test. And then there was another that was you had to go in and you had mock patients who basically had to demonstrate that you know how to interact with patients and also diagnose them with certain disease states, write up a note. Um, that was a wild experience. One of my here, Scrap, he's actively chasing something in his dream. Um, one of my mock patients was playing somebody with, I think it was like schizophrenia with paranoia or something, and I walked into the room and they weren't sitting on the bed, and so and this is like like really tight timed sort of stuff. So I like turned around and like looked out the hall at the monitor, and they're like, they just kind of smiled and just said, "Go back in." And I was like, "All right." And so I go to sit down thinking like maybe they're going to walk them in or something. I don't know. And then as I sit down, I see him like crouched under the table. I'm like, oh, hi. Okay. Um, that was wild, but finished. Yeah. That was step two CS. So clinical skills. And then the written test was CK, which was clinical knowledge. And then I started looking at what I wanted to do for my fourth year. A lot of people who are sane don't do what I did in my fourth year. They try to stay in that general vicinity of where they're at. They do some more rotations at the hospital where they did their third year. There were traditionally a couple satellite hospitals around that you could do other rotations at. I wanted to go and see trauma surgery, ER, ICU in multiple different parts of the country because it honestly is very different. Just like what type of hospital are you at? Are you at a Mayo Clinic, or are you at a level one trauma center that's a county hospital? You're going to get a totally different experience. And so I wanted to go and see as many different versions in different parts of the US as I could. And so I did another gen surg rotation in just outside of Bakersfield, which was great. I then went to Chicago and rotated on the south side. Saw some crazy stuff. Had to actually like fight a nurse to intubate a patient that was dying because she didn't want a ventilated patient in her ER. There was no room in the ICU. That was wild. I did I think that was emergency medicine, and then I did cardiac there. Then I went to a hospital outside of Detroit, did surgical ICU, and I think surgery there. And then I went out to Baltimore and did surgery. Yeah, I think it was just general, like a basic surgery, but you rotated between different specialties. So I got to do a plastics rotation there for 2 weeks, which is what I originally thought I actually wanted to do in medicine. Thus, why I shadowed the plastic surgeon before. I had kind of ruled it out in terms of what I could actually get into because of the things I had learned over time about, how competitive it is to get into a plastics residency. Being a Caribbean medical student, I now understood, what that battle would be. But I also almost fell asleep in the OR doing a plastics procedure. So, hindsight, even if I had thought that that would be an option, definitely not. It is so meticulous, which is incredible. Like some of the things that they're able to do with sutures is, mind blowing. But the meticulous nature of how you're performing these surgeries and the clientele and the entitlement, I couldn't do it. Even more reasoning why I knew trauma was the right path for me. We're getting in, we're stopping whatever's going on. I'm so used to just like talking to people who know these things I should not say out loud, that like, oh, and then you just staple them up. You do. Um, but it was another reason why I was like, okay, I know this. Trauma surgery is my path. And so I finished those rotations and I went to go start applying for residency. At that point, I was applying to general surgery residencies because that is your traditional path to trauma. So you do a gen surge residency traditionally at a hospital that is a trauma center. If possible, you can do it other ways. And then you usually go and do a surgical ICU fellowship on top of that. So I think that would have been 5 years of gen surge, 2 years surgical ICU. Maybe it's one or 2 years in surgical ICU fellowship. And I applied. First year, I didn't get any interviews, which obviously is not a great sign. So there was no way I was going to get a residency. And at this point, I've moved back to Minneapolis. I'm actually now doing research, which we'll get more into in the next episode of kind of what that all looked like. But I was doing, basically treating it like a gap year where I'm doing everything I can to bolster my application for the next year, make relationships with the surgery department at the hospital I'm at. And I'm also now dating my husband and juggling, keeping him a little bit at like an arm's distance because you don't have any control over where you match. I could match in Nebraska and that's my only option. You don't get to choose to go somewhere else. And so that first year I don't get in. I'm doing research. I apply a second year. I get a good handful of interviews around here and at other places where I had rotated, which was promising, showing that obviously I've done something to help my application here. All sounded promising. I had some ins. I had people, advocating for me from inside the organization, which was great. Again, ended up not matching. Had a couple friends reach out and ask if I was interested in something outside of surgery. So as I mentioned, there's the SOAP thing, so you can see, what rotate or what residencies are available kind of across the board that are unfilled. And I had one friend reach out that was at a family medicine. I think someone in family medicine and someone in internal medicine had reached out, said, we've got unfilled spots. Like, I would totally advocate for you if you want to apply. And in that moment, you're so, just like beat down, but desperate because you went through all this work. You passed all your exams. You spent the time to get the MD, which I now have. And for a second, you consider, okay, well, I guess practicing is just practicing. It is what it is. And every time I would talk myself out of it because I knew that I went into this to not just have a job. I didn't go into medicine because I wanted to be the doctor. I didn't go into medicine because I wanted just to practice. I wanted to go into medicine because I wanted something that was stimulating, that I was making impacts in people's lives, but ultimately like made me excited to get up and go to work and do stuff. And it was so exceptionally clear that I would have been a bad primary care physician as I was doing that rotation. I could not have cared less about your cough, about your rash, about your whatever. I there are there are people who that is their, not that coughs are anyone's passion, but like helping people manage their day-to-day health and moving them through their lives and being the person that they go to ask these questions instead of WebMD. I'm just not one of those people. And so I knew I had to stick to it and continue doing research, applied a third year. Again, got more interviews, new hospitals at some places that I was actually fairly surprised, because the longer that you're out from actual like training, so med school or rotations, traditionally the harder it is for you to land a residency. And I would say that it was even maybe a little bit risky for me to apply that third year based on the stats that I had seen coming out. And so but I did it. And one of the things that I think has changed since then, but I think is important to highlight as we're talking about Caribbean medical school journeys, is we were encouraged to apply to as many programs as you could. And each application cost money. So every year I was spending probably 10 to 15 grand on applications and then traveling to interviews. And I was working in research. I was not making a lot of money. There were points in time where like I would go take out a personal loan to afford these things. And my third year, I just said, this has to be the last. I can't spend this money anymore. I can't go through the insane mental, emotional, high, low, sideways, backwards. I was I was getting back spasms so bad that I would wake up in the middle of the night unable to breathe because they were affecting my diaphragm. I had to go on intermittent muscle relaxers for that. I was waking up at 1 a.m. unable to go back to sleep and would just go into the research lab and work, pickling my liver with Tito's. Like it was a wild ride. And knowing that I did everything I did, and not to be that guy, but made most first and second year residents look bad in the OR because I was better than them as a fourth year med student in terms of my ability to suture and do all those things. I mean, there was trigger warning. There was one patient who came in and they had gone and been in a car accident, had gone through a windshield and had cut up their face quite badly. And they trusted me to sit in the or in the ER and suture it all back up over the intern resident that was also there. So I knew that I was good at what I was doing. I knew that I had put in the time. I knew that I was not even compensating for knowledge with effort, but I was absolutely subsidizing my knowledge with effort. And ultimately didn't match. Did the soap again, didn't matter, and I just had to shut the door and say, I know I gave this my all. I know that I would have been a really great surgeon. I know that I also had all of these things up against me. And they were decisions that I made. I chose to go to the school I went to. I chose to approach my studying the way I did. I chose to try and defy the odds based on my scores and get into a specialty that, if you put it in a stats Excel sheet, it would say no. And I chose to not be safe and apply for, or even do rotations in specialties that weren't exactly what I wanted to do, because I knew I wasn't going to be happy doing those things. And I absolutely do not regret it. I do not regret going through that experience. I do not regret sticking to what I knew was right for me. I do not regret having this degree. I am not a practicing family physician, but I am my family's physician. There have been many like major life health events on my side of the family, my in-law side of the family, that I've been able to navigate, translate, guide us all through in a way that I think has been really helpful. And read, radiology reports and be like, that's cover your ass language, or this is really something that we, need to key in on, or help make, horrible decisions about life support and things like that. So I definitely do not regret where I've gotten to. And I will say, this again, we'll touch on another episode, but now even being on the business side of medical research, I get to use my MD most of the week. I'm talking to people who are developing new incredible drugs in, the radiopharma space. I get to talk to some of the premier researchers in pediatric brain cancer. Like I am constantly using that knowledge and helping to make our product better for that end user. I learned things actually now that I didn't get taught in med school, like things around the eye, so ophthalmology. I know way more about ophthalmology than I ever did in med school because I helped develop products for those groups. So I don't regret it. I really wish I could just erase my debt, but that is what it is. And honestly, it has opened up so many opportunities for me on this side that I get to be a subject matter expert for, that I couldn't have propelled my career the way I have if I didn't have the training that I do. So even though it wasn't what I wanted, what I hoped, what, you know, part of me feels like potentially I deserved, I'm really glad that I've found a way to actually use it still and not just kind of abandon and, you know, go off into some other sector of the world, because it really is, I mean, it is up until this point one of my greatest accomplishments. So that is a very long-winded discussion around my Caribbean medical school experience. I'm definitely going to have to edit this because we're currently at an hour and 35 minutes, and there's no way you guys need to listen to that much of my rambling. But I want to kind of cap us off here with the so what, right? So if you are, let's say you are interested in medicine for whatever reason, the US schools don't seem to be the right option for you, who I would say a Caribbean medical school experience would be well suited for is someone who is resilient. You consider yourself kind of a self-starter or a self-teacher, where you are able to take kind of initial direction and go and kind of study on your own without any real oversight. And I think that if you want to feel good about being able to get into a certain specialty, I would say those of you interested in internal medicine, family medicine, or pediatrics, you shouldn't face a lot of problems getting in as long as you pass your board exams and you know, do all the things that you're supposed to do, work hard, impress the people that you're rotating with. Other tidbits that I were kind of learnings for me that I'm sure on some forum you could find, but that I didn't quite do, was starting to study for step one, so your first board exam, right away. So when you're starting first semester, start going through that. Ultimately, that test is you have to pass that one or it's kind of a non-starter. And so I would start studying from that super early on. Before you go, I don't know if there's coaches or whatever, but figure out what your learning style is so that you can apply that right away once you get there. And be prepared to be challenged in a way that you had never quite seen being feasible. I think a lot of us who are physicians or did get their MDs, not that school was always easy, but it wasn't as hard as maybe the person to our left or to our right thought it was. This is the Thunderdome. This is the Super Bowl. You are in there with people who were all at the top of their classes. And the level of academic excellence and perseverance and self-control that you need is, and rightfully so, it is way higher. I know, you know, my sister is a lawyer. My best friend was a lawyer as well. Similar, similar experiences, no question there. And I'll leave it with this, which I guess is somewhat depressing, so maybe I'll not. But there's a reason why they send mental health packets and pamphlets with your acceptance letter and your intro to med school bundle. It is really mentally challenging and physically challenging. And it is easy for people to feel isolated, and with constant levels of stress, you can find yourself really kind of lost in the sauce. And if you don't have really great support at home or in your friend group, I would highly suggest putting some things in place to help you navigate. We live in a world in which you can use something like BetterHelp, where you've got a therapist that you can talk to regularly when it fits your schedule, because your schedule is not your schedule. It's the schedule that somebody has given to you. If you really, really, really want to be in medicine, and let's say that you've applied a couple years to US schools and it's not working, and you do want to go into internal medicine, pediatrics, family medicine, it is definitely an option. I just want you, if you choose to do that, to go in with your eyes wide open. So that is that. We're going to have an episode this weekend around medical applications of AI. I have been very fortunate to be in conversations with some of the most influential people in that space. Actually just came back from, I don't know if you guys have heard of this company called NVIDIA, NVIDIA. They are a chip company, but they are massive, massive, massive. They've got a lot of things around healthcare AI. Same thing with Amazon's cloud, which is AWS. I've spent a lot of time with incredible folks across multiple organizations that are kind of at the forefront here. So give you kind of an insight into like, what does that actually mean? Hopefully dispel some of the like scary headlines that exist. And then we're going to deep dive into what did it look like for me going, instead of into residency, but into research. What are the opportunities that exist there? And then same thing with how did I transition from research into the commercial side of healthcare software. Talk about different options for folks that, if let's say you did end up in a position that I'm in where you have an MD but didn't end up going to clinical practice, or have chosen to step away from clinical practice, what sort of opportunities exist, and my kind of rubric of what to look for. And yeah, I think I'm going to be sprinkling in some like fun vloggy stuff too that will live on this channel. Obviously not podcast style stuff, but yeah, hopefully this is helpful. If you know someone who's thinking about Caribbean medical schools or med schools in general, feel free to share this with them. And if any of you have had experiences, share them in the comments. Would love to hear everyone's perspective. Again, just as my disclaimer, this was like my experience. All of my other friends, are practicing. They have, phenomenal jobs and are loving it and doing amazing things. So this is just really my experience, but I know that it's one that isn't represented widely because people, feel shame or whatever around it. And I feel that it's helpful to not only show my realities of what I chose to do and how I got here, but also with a little bit of a it's going to be okay, because I've figured it out, and hopefully I can help lay the path for anyone who is kind of earlier in that stage trying to figure out what the hell to do with that incredible education and background. That's going to be it. I'm going to call it. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you soon.